The money counted out before he finished walking up the drive. $3. That was all she had left in the world. And she was about to hand it to a stranger who looked like he'd been chased out of every county between here and the Kansas line. Her barn was half collapsed. Winter was 6 weeks away. And every man in Harlan had already told her no. So when Noah Carter stopped at her gate and asked if she had work, Vera Sutton did not hesitate. She said yes. She just didn't know she was also saying yes to everything that came with him. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Vera Sutton counted the coins twice because she didn't believe the first count. $3.40. That was what remained after she paid the feed merchant, paid the water tax, and bought the nails she needed. For a roof, she wasn't sure she could fix on her own. $3.40 standing between her and the end of everything her father had spent 30 years building. She set the coins on the kitchen table and did not look at them again. Outside, the barn leaned like a man who had taken one punch too many. The earth wall had buckled in February during the worst storm Harlan County had seen in a generation. Two of the main support beams had snapped clean through. The loft had partially collapsed, and the roof over the east end let in enough sky that she could watch weather move in before it arrived. She'd lost 4 animals to exposure that winter. The rest she'd managed to shelter in the house's back room, which had not made her popular with anyone sleeping inside it. 3 men from town had come out to give estimates. The first wanted $48. The second wanted $60. The third looked at the barn, looked at her, and told her she should think seriously about selling the property before it became a liability she couldn't manage alone. He said it kindly. That was the worst part. She thanked all 3 and closed the gate behind each one. That was a month ago. The barn was still standing, and Vera was still the only person on the Sutton property. Their comps, she was carrying a bucket of feed toward the paddock when she heard boots on gravel and looked up. He came from the road, not from town, from the road itself. They'd been walking it for days. He was tall, lean in the way men get when they've missed more meals than they've eaten. It was oilskin, cracked at the elbows. He carried a canvas pack over one shoulder and a wooden toolbox in his right hand, and he walked like a man who had learned a long time ago not to expect a welcome. At the gate, he didn't call out, didn't wave, just stood there and waited the way a man waits when he's not sure if he's allowed to hope. Vera set down her bucket. She kept her distance. You looking for the Alderman place, she said. That's 3 miles north. Most people miss the turnoff. I'm not looking for the Alderman place. His voice was low, like a man who had learned that speaking fast got you nowhere. What are you looking for? He glanced at the barn. Look at her. Work, he said. If you've got it. Vera studied him for a long moment. He didn't shift his weight, didn't try to fill the silence with explanations. He just stood there and took her measure the same way she was taking his. Better, she said, among other things. What other things? Depends on what needs doing. She looked at the barn. She looked at her $3.40 sitting on the kitchen table inside the house. She looked at the man at her gate who had a toolbox that had clearly been used and a face that had clearly taken some damage of its own. And she said something that surprised her even as she said it. Look at it. He opened the gate himself, latched it behind him. She noted that they stood in front of the barn without speaking for almost a full minute. He set his pack down. He walked the perimeter slowly, one hand along the boards, pressing at certain points with his palm, crouching to look at the base of the north wall, where it had started to pull away from the foundation. Vera watched him work and didn't say anything. Finally, he stood up and turned around. Both main beams need replacing, he said, not sistering replacing. The east roof section needs new decking before you re-shingle, or you're just covering the problem. Emulsion on the north corner has shifted. You fix it now. It's a 2-week job. You wait until spring. You're looking at starting over. I know all that, Vera said. Then you know it has to be done before the first hard freeze. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. What are you offering? Room and board, she said. And $3 a week. Something moved across his face. She couldn't quite name it. It wasn't amusement. It was an insult. Closer to recognition, like he'd heard an offer like this before, not this offer, but this particular combination of pride and limitation wearing the shape of a number. $3 is short, he said. Yes, Vera said. It is. He was quiet for a moment. Room where? There's a hand's quarters attached to the stable. Has a stove. Board meaning what? 3 meals, if you're here for 3 meals. Not plain, but I cook enough. He looked at the barn again, then at his toolbox, then at some middle distance that had nothing to do with either one. The cutter, he said. He didn't offer his hand. Vera didn't either. Vera Sutton, she said. When can you start now, he said. You've got the materials. She had half a stack of seasoned timber her father had stored in the back of the stable 3 years ago, 2 boxes of nails she'd bought on account, and a determination that had not yet found its limit. She showed him all of it. He looked at the timber, ouched, and ran his thumb along the grain of the first board, checking moisture content, checking for splits. This'll work for the decking, he said. The beams need to be cut fresh. Is there a mill? Gunderson, East. Credit or cash? Vera didn't answer right away. Hush, she said, but limited. He nodded once, like he'd expected that too. We'll see what I can do with what's here first, he said. We'll figure out the beam situation when we get to it. That was the first day. Before she was the next morning. Came out at first light and found him already on the ladder, stripping the damaged shingles from the east section with a methodical patience that told her he'd done this kind of work before, not once or twice, many times, in many places. She brought him coffee without being asked. He took it without saying, thank you. He said, there's rot under the second course. Worse than it looked from the ground. How much worse? I'll know when I pull it. She stood at the base of the ladder. That cost more than I told you. Probably. I want you to tell me before you buy anything. He looked down at her from the ladder. Going to run up debts in your name without asking? I don't know what you're going to do, Vera said. I don't know you. He held her gaze for a moment. Something passed through his eyes that she didn't have a name for yet. He said. Then he turned back to the roof. She went inside and started the morning's work. By noon, he had stripped the entire east section and laid out the damaged boards in a row on the ground, recognized by severity which pieces could be saved, which couldn't. She came out to look and found herself surprised. Men she'd hired in the past dropped everything in a pile. Unsorted. You've got 8 boards that are still sound, he said. Oh. The sound ones? Go back up if you want to save on lumber. Us? Yes. I want to save on lumber, she said. He picked up the first board and carried it back toward the barn. Him for a moment. Have you done this before? Repair? Yes, in Montana? He didn't answer immediately. He was measuring the board against the roof edge. Elsewhere, he said. Else. Wyoming. Colorado. A stretch in Nebraska. You've been through a lot of places. He didn't respond to that. The board didn't reach for his hammer. Vera had learned by the age of 14 that some silences were invitations and some were walls. One was a wall. She didn't push against it. She went back inside. Evening at supper, she set 2 plates. He came in, washed his hands at the basin, and sat down without being asked to. That surprised her slightly. Most hired men waited to be told where to sit, as if sitting unbidden might be taken wrong. He ate without talking. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of 2 people with nothing to prove to each other yet. Poured more coffee, he said. The north wall is worse than the beams. She set the pot down. How so? The sill plate is rotted through on the east corner. You put new beams in without out-addressing it. The whole wall has nothing solid to sit on. You'll lose everything you spent by spring. Vera looked at him across the table. Tell me the job got bigger. Yes. Before you've even started the part I hired you for. Yes. And you're telling me this now, or instead of just quietly doing it. He met her eyes. Ours. Because it's your money and your barn and your decision, not mine. Vera sat very still for a moment. In her experience, some who worked for women either forgot whose property they were on or never let you forget they thought you couldn't handle the information. and was doing neither. How much more, she said. Materials, maybe $4 if we're careful. Labor is already covered. He paused. I'll work the extra without adding to the 3. Why? He picked up his coffee cup. Because the job isn't done if the wall falls over in March. She looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away, but he didn't press her either. Right, she said. He nodded, finished his coffee, stood up. I'll start on the sill plate first thing. He was gone before she could say anything else. She heard the stable door close, and then the property was quiet. And she sat at the table with her coffee cold and something she didn't quite trust turning over slowly in her chest. Her day brought a complication she hadn't anticipated. Ed Bremer came up the drive in his wagon just before midday. Ed Bremer was 62 years old, had been her father's neighbor for 20 years, an opinion about everything that happened on the Sutton property, as if he'd been granted that right by proximity and seniority. He was not a bad man. He was simply one of those men who mistakes helpfulness for authority. Up and looked at the barn, where Noah was working, and then he looked at Vera. Who is that? He said. Hired man, Vera said. Where'd he come from? He came looking for work. I needed work done. Ed climbed down from the wagon slowly, taking his time the way men do when they're about to say something they've been composing in their head since before they left home. He said, you know anything about him? I know he can fix a barn. Do you know his name? He's from. Who he worked for before? Ed, Vera said. I'm asking because your father asked me to look out for you. Vera said, has been dead for 2 years. He asked you to look in on the property, not to approve my hiring decisions. Ed stopped. He had the look of a man who had expected this conversation to go differently. He's a stranger, Ed said, living on your property, alone. That's not. He's in the hands' quarters, Vera said, which is 20 yards from the house and has its own door. He's here is because you and Bill Haskell, Harry Crabtree, all told me the job was too expensive and I should think about selling. I found someone I could afford. Is there something else you came to say? Ed looked at her for a moment, and he looked at Noah on the barn. Noah, to his credit, had not turned around. He was measuring a board with complete, unhurried attention. I could send my boy over, Ed said finally. Jimmy could help. Jimmy Bremer couldn't drive a nail straight in his best year, Vera said. No offense to your son or to you, but I've got someone who can. I'm going to let him. Ed got back on his wagon. He didn't look happy, but he didn't argue anymore. There he picked up the reins. He looked at her one more time. If anything goes wrong, he said, you send word, I will, she said. There, she watched him drive away. Then she turned to find Noah had come down from the ladder and was standing a few yards behind her. Bappers, you didn't have to fight that battle for me, he said. Fight it for me, Vera said. Not you. He was quiet for a moment. Tom will talk, he said, if they're not already. People talked when my father hired 2 Mexican drovers and a freedman to work the spring roundup in 1873, Vera said. He didn't change his hiring decisions, and neither will I. Noah looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Then he turned back to the barn. I'll have the sill plate done by Friday, he said. She went back inside. That night she lay awake longer than usual, not because of Ed Bremer, not because of the barn or the money or the approaching cold, because of something small and specific that was bothering her in the way small specific things do when they mean something you haven't figured out yet. Carter had walked up her drive, carrying a toolbox battered and scarred and clearly well-traveled. He had known immediately what the barn needed. He had known better than the 3 men from town who came with pencils and paper and charge rates by the hour. Told her about the sill plate before he fixed it because it was her money and her decision. And he had not once, not in 3 days, asked a single question about her. Not why she was running the property alone. Not where her husband was. Why her father had left it to her instead of selling. How long she intended to keep at it. Nothing. In Vera's experience, people, especially men, filled silence with questions. Questions were how they established where you fit and whether you were someone they needed to account for. Her seemed to have no interest in where she fit. She wasn't sure if that was respectful or evasive. She suspected it was both. She closed her eyes. She made herself think about the lumber costs instead. On Friday, the sill plate was done. There she went out to inspect it and found the work cleaner than she'd expected. The joinery was tight, the fit precise. She pressed her hand against the base of the wall, where the new plate met the foundation stone, and felt nothing give. "This is good work," she said. Noah was coiling a length of rope behind her. "Adequate," he said. "It's better than adequate." He didn't argue. Oh, but he didn't agree either. She had the sense that he applied the word adequate as a permanent ceasing, as if calling his own work good would be claiming something he didn't feel entitled to. She wanted to say something about that. She didn't know how. Instead, she said, "I need to go to Gunderson's mill on Monday for the beam timber. I'd like you to come, so you can tell me exactly what we need and I don't end up with the wrong dimensions. All right? Do you ride?" He looked at her. "Take that as a yes," she said. "I can take the wagon if you'd rather." "I'd rather take the wagon," she said. "Long drive to manage alone." He nodded. Then he went back to his work. Abby went back to hers, and neither of them said anything more about Monday. There came with a sky the color of old pewter and a wind off the north that meant business. Left before 7. Noah drove because he offered, and Vera accepted without ceremony. She sat on the right side of the bench with her coat buttoned to the throat and her list in her coat pocket board feet. Dimensions grade, all of it written out the night before. They were 2 miles out before either of them said anything. "How long have you been on the road?" Vera said. She felt him consider the question the same way he considered the barn carefully. Rushing. 3 years, he said. "Since what?" A pause. Evasive exactly. More like he was deciding how much of the truth he was willing to hand over. "Most my situation changed," he said. Vera decided not to push. Held it. "You're from Montana originally?" "No, where?" "East." She looked at him. "That covers a great deal of territory." "Yes," he said. The wagon rolled on. She looked at the sky, clouds, decided the rain would hold until afternoon. "You're not going to tell me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Much worth telling," he said. "That's not the same as nothing worth telling." He was quiet for a long moment. The road curved, and he guided the horses through it without thinking, the way a man guides something he's done 1,000 times. "A life," he said finally. "It ended. I moved on." A version of that story that makes for good company on a long drive. Vera looked at the road ahead. "I had a life too," she said. 3 years ago, I was supposed to be married. I decided he'd rather have a wife in a town with a proper society and a church with a stained glass window than a woman who was going to spend her life on a working cattle property at the edge of everything. He left the week after my father got sick. I stayed. Father died. I kept the property." She paused. "That's the version that covers it." Noah said nothing. Something in the way he held the reins changed. She couldn't have described it exactly. It was just a shift, the kind that happens when a person recalibrates what they're dealing with. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be," Vera said. "He made the right choice for him. I made the right choice for me. I just don't always love what the right choice costs." Noah nodded slowly. Kind of nod, that means, "I understand exactly what you just said." They drove in silence for another mile, but it was different silence now. Like a wall and more like shared ground. Gunderson's mill was loud and smelled of cut pine and sawdust, and the cold sweat of men working hard in cold air. Vera had been here before, with her father years ago. Foreman remembered her. His name was Dawes. It was heavy-set, 60s, with the kind of hands that had spent 40 years in contact with machinery. He said, "Haven't seen you since your father passed." "Sorry about that, by the way." "Good man." "He was," Vera said. "This is Noah Carter. He's doing the repair work on the barn." He'll exact specifications. Dawes looked at Noah the way men size up other men quickly, filing several things at once. "Carter," he said. "Dawes," Noah said. Something moved between them. Not hostility exactly. They're like mutual assessment. "You know timber work?" Dawes said. Noah said. "Where'd you learn it?" "Here and there," Noah said. "I need Douglas fir for the main beams. 12 inches nominal. Be great if you've got it. 16 feet. 2 of them. And I need rough-cut pine for the secondary framing standard dimension, whatever's available. Dawes had been reaching for his ledger. He stopped. He looked at Noah with slightly different eyes. There's fir, clear grade, he said. That's expensive timber for a barn repair. The beams carry the entire load, Noah said. You put inferior timber in the main structure. You're back in 3 years doing it again. Clear grade holds longer and it's easier to work. You save on labor what you spend on material. Dawes looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at Vera. He knows what he's talking about. I know, Vera said. Dawes wrote up the order. He quoted the price. It was more than Vera wanted to spend, and less than she had feared. She paid the deposit and arranged delivery for Wednesday. When they got back to the wagon, she said, "You have an education." Noah untied the horses from the post. "I can read," he said, "and I've built enough things to know what holds and what doesn't." "That's not what I mean." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "You spoke to Dawes the way a man speaks to another man in his own field," she said. "With specifics, with reasons, not with bravado. You knew the right timber before you ever walked into that mill, and you knew how to justify it. That's not barn repair." Engineering, Noah was quiet. "Where did you work before?" Vera said. "The 3 years on the road." He got up onto the wagon bench. He waited until she was seated beside him. "I built things," he said. "Bigger things than barns. In a different life." "What happened to that life?" He picked up the reins. "I trusted the wrong person," he said, "and it cost me everything I'd built." He clicked the horses forward, and they rolled back onto the road toward Harlan. And Vera sat beside him, with the wind pushing at her coat and the first drops of rain beginning to fall. And she understood for the first time that Noah Carter was not a drifter. He was a man who had been driven out. That understanding settled over her like the rain quietly, early, changing the texture of everything it touched. That night, she didn't go to bed when she should have. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and the account book open in front of her and thought about what it meant to trust someone she didn't fully know with the most important thing she owned. It was not the barn she was thinking about. She closed the account book, let herself go to bed. Wednesday arrived. Dawes sent it on a flatbed wagon with 2 men to help unload. Vera paid the remainder and thanked them, and they were gone before noon. Noah walked the length of each beam, running his hands along the grain. For anything Dawes's mill might have missed. Touched beside one end of the first beam and looked at Vera. He said, "Better than I expected for the price." "Dawes liked you," Vera said. "He gave us the better cut." Noah looked up at her. "Dawes gave you the better cut," he said. "You're the one who paid for it." She almost said something to that. "Go." He stood up. "I'll start on the beam installation tomorrow. I'll need you to hold the come-along while I position the first one. It's not a one-man job at that stage." "I can do that," Vera said. "Heavy work." She looked at him steadily. "I've been doing heavy work since I was 14. I expect I can manage a come-along for an afternoon." Something crossed his face. A flicker of something she hadn't seen there before. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, very much like respect. "All right," he said. "Good," she said. "I'll be here at first light." She walked back to the house, and she made herself not look back, and she was almost to the door when she heard him say, quietly, to no one in particular or to her, she wasn't sure which, "She's something, that woman." Vera went inside and closed the door and stood very still in her own kitchen for a long moment, put on the kettle, and got back to work. The following Monday, everything changed. She was in the kitchen when she heard voices outside. Her voices, more than one. She came out to find 3 men standing in the yard, not at the gate. In the yard, and Noah was standing between them and the barn with his arms crossed and his toolbox nowhere in sight. The man in the center was tall, well-dressed for a working day, with the sort of posture that comes from spending a lot of time looking down at people from horseback. He had a silver watch chain and a coat that cost him more than most men in Harlan made in a month. But she recognized the type. "Miss Sutton," he said, turning toward her. He had an easy smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sorry to come without notice. My name is Harlan Voss. I own the Voss Land Company. We've been expanding our holdings in this county. That property has come to our attention. Vera looked at him. First, she looked at the two men flanking him who were doing an efficient impression of furniture. Looked at Noah, who had not moved and was not going to. Property is not for sale, Vera said. Voss kept his smile. I understand that may be your current position. I'd just like a few minutes of your time to make an offer. What I have in mind may change your thinking considerably. My thinking, Vera said, doesn't change on the basis of unannounced visits from men I don't know. Voss glanced at Noah. His expression shifted just slightly, just enough for her to catch it. I see you've taken on a hired man, he said. I wouldn't have thought a repair operation of this scale was within your means. The property's current situation. You seem to know a great deal about my situation, Vera said. Someone who's never been to my property before today. Voss paused. This was too short to be embarrassment and too long to be innocent. I do my research before approaching a landowner, he said. Only respectful. Then you know I'm not selling, Vera said, which makes this visit something other than respectful. The smile held. May we at least discuss the offer? You may not, Vera said. I'll ask you to close the gate on your way out. Voss held her gaze for a moment. His expression was very pleasant and very still. Then he reached into his coat and produced a card, a real card, with his name and company name and a billings address. Put it out. Vera did not take it. After a moment, he set it on top of the fence post nearest to him. Offer doesn't expire immediately, he said. I hope you'll give it proper consideration. He turned and walked to his horse. His two men followed. None of them looked at Noah. The gate latched behind them. Vera stood in the yard without moving until the sound of hoofbeats faded down the road. Then she looked at Noah. He was watching the gate. Who he is, she said. I know the type, Noah said. Company. Coming in ahead of something, a rail line, survey, a government grant. They buy out the small holders before the value goes up. They're betting you don't know what your land is worth yet. Vera looked at the card on the fence post. Know what my land is worth? She said. Noah looked at her directly. More than he's going to offer. Whatever he puts on paper, the real number is higher. She walked to the fence post and picked up the card. She turned it over. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a number. She looked at it for a long moment. It was more than she'd expected. Which meant, exactly as Noah had said, that the real number was higher still. She took the card and put it in her coat pocket. A beam installation, she said. Yes, Noah said. He walked back to the house, and this time she did look back. Noah had already turned to the barn, but his jaw was set in a way it hadn't been before. And his hands, when he picked up its tools, were moving with something extra underneath the precision. She went inside, sat down, and let herself think carefully about what Harlan Voss being here actually meant. Because in her experience, men like that didn't show up once. They showed up until they got what they wanted, and what he wanted was her land, which meant that the barn was no longer the only thing that needed defending. She did not sleep well that night, not because of Harlan Voss, exactly, because of what his visit meant when she laid it out plainly in the dark and stopped dressing it in simpler explanations. He had known her financial position. He had known the scale of the repair work, had known she was running the property alone, and he had come on a Monday, when most legitimate business visits happened on town days, Wednesday or Saturday when people were already moving. He had come on a Monday because he had wanted to catch her at a disadvantage. Tired, working, unprepared. She turned that over for a long time. Then she thought about the number on the back of his card. It was $800. $800 for a property that her father had appraised at $1,100 3 years ago. The water rights survey, before the north pasture, was fully fenced. Everything she had added to it since. $800 was not an offer. It was an insult dressed up as generosity. She got up before dawn, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the card face down on the wood in front of her. She did not turn it over. She already knew what it said. What she needed to figure out was who had told Harlan Voss about her finances. Because she had not told anyone. Not Ed Bremer, not the men from town, the feed merchant, Not the water tax office, not anyone. Someone had been talking. She heard the stable door open. A few minutes later, the sound of a hammer beginning slow at first, then finding its rhythm. Noah was already working. She picked up her coffee and drank it and let the hammer strokes count out the morning. She went out at 7 with his breakfast plate and found him halfway up the barn wall, positioning the first of the new main beams. He had rigged a block and tackle system from the loft opening that she had not seen him set up, and the beam was suspended at exactly the height he needed it. He was working alone. You were supposed to wait for me on that, she said. He looked down from the loft opening where he'd anchored the pulley. It rigged last night. I can hold the position myself if you'll run the come-along on the ground. That's not what we agreed. What we agreed was that I'd need help positioning it. No way not to need help. That saves you an hour of heavy work. Vera set the plate on the saw bench and looked up at him. Next time you change the plan, she said, you tell me before you start. After. He was quiet for a moment. Understood, he said. It was not an apology, but it was not nothing either. She took the come-along rope and they worked the beam into position together, her managing the tension below, guiding the placement from above, calling down adjustments in short terms, left hold, quarter-inch right, hold. When the beam settled into the notch he had cut for it, what it made was solid, final, the sound of something that was going to last. He came down the ladder and checked the fit every angle. He said. It's better than good, Vera said. And this time, I'm not going to let you argue with me about that. He almost smiled. She was almost certain of it. She picked up his breakfast plate and held it out to him. He took it and sat on the saw bench and ate without ceremony. She sat on the fence rail across from him. Someone told Voss about my finances, she said. Chewing, he looked at her. The 3 men who came to give estimates, she said, one of them must have talked. Or someone at the feed merchant, the water tax office. Someone gave him my situation in enough detail that he knew exactly what kind of offer to make. Noah set the plate down on his knee. What kind of offer did he make? He said. 800. Something moved through his face. Hard to name, close to anger but quiet. Your father's appraisal was higher than that, he said. 1100 3 years ago. And the property has improved since then. Then Voss knows he's low, Noah said. He's not trying to buy you out at fair value. He's trying to buy you out at a number you might take because you're scared. I'm not scared, Vera said. Oh, Noah said. But he thinks you might be. And whoever told him your situation told him in a way designed to make him think you were close to the edge. Vera looked at him. You think it was coordinated? I think Voss didn't come to your property by accident. On a Monday morning, Noah said. I think whoever talked to him wanted him to come. The hammer he'd set down was between them on the saw bench. He was looking at it without seeing it, thinking through something. The men who gave estimates, he said. Do you remember their names? Crabtree. There's a man named Dylan who came from the county office. Noah was very still. One from the county office, he said slowly. The third one. Yes. He was the one who told me I should think about selling. Noah picked up his coffee cup, realized it was empty, set it down again. That's not a coincidence, he said. No, Vera said. It isn't. She slid off the fence rail, at the barn, at the new beam visible through the open wall section, blood and pale against the darker old timber. I'm going to find out who Dylan reports to, she said. And what his connection to Voss is. And I'm going to do it before Voss comes back. He will come back, Noah said. No, Vera said. I'm counting on it. She walked toward the house. Then she stopped and turned. The second beam needs to go in by Friday, she said. If we need another hour with the come-along, you'll wait for me. This time. Yes, Noah said. She went inside. She drove into Harlan that afternoon. The land office was on the main street between the hardware merchant and the post office, a building that had originally been a bank and still had the old vault door visible through the back office window. She had been here twice before, once with her father to register the deed transfer after his appraisal, to pay the property tax after his death. At the front desk was a young man named Fisher, who had the look of someone who had recently discovered that the world was more complicated than his schooling had prepared him for. Looked up when she came in. Miss Sutton, he said. Good afternoon, she said. I'd like to see the record of property inquiries for the Sutton holding. The County Improvement Act, landowners have the right to know what inquiries have been registered against their property. Fisher blinked. Sure. He had not expected that. Yes, of course. That would be in the public record log. Sure. If you'll give me a moment. He went to the back. She heard drawers opening. He was gone longer than a moment should require. Well, when he came back, his face had changed. I'm sorry, he said. The log for that property doesn't appear to be in the current file. Appears to be, Vera said. Isn't, Fisher said. He had the look of a man who had been told something and was now trying to figure out how much of it to repeat. She said. It may have been pulled for a review process. Pulled by whom? Fisher looked at the counter between them. Not certain, I'm at liberty to say. Vera put both hands flat on the counter. Well, she was not a tall woman, but she had a way of taking up exactly the space she needed. Mr. Fisher, she said, if a record pertaining to my property has been removed from the public file, I have a legal right to know who removed it and why. The right does not disappear because someone finds it inconvenient. Fisher was sweating slightly. It was pulled for a review by the county assessor, he said. I know. Who is the county assessor? Mr. Aldrich, he said. Vera straightened up. Was a man named Dillon involved in this review? Fisher went very still. I know who you mean, he said. He knew exactly who she meant. Thank you, Vera said. I'll speak with Mr. Aldrich directly. She turned toward the door. Sir. Miss Sutton, Fisher's voice was low. She turned. He looked like a man who had just decided something. I was pulled last Thursday, he said, the day after a Mr. Voss visited this office. He said it very quietly. Then he looked down at the counter and did not look up again. Vera walked out into the street. She stood there for a moment with the wind at her back and the weight of what Fisher had just told her, settling into her like cold water. Voss had visited the county office. The record was pulled. He had come to her property and told her to think about selling. And then Voss had shown up on her doorstep with an offer that presumed she was nearly out of options. Opportunism. It was a system. A small, efficient system designed to move one stubborn woman off her land before she understood what was happening. She went to the post office. She sent a wire to her father's old lawyer in Billings, a man named Hargrove, who had handled the deed transfer and who owed her father a professional courtesy he'd never had occasion to repay. There said, Inquiry re. Voss Land Company and County Assessor's Office, Harlan. Possible irregularity in land record handling. Please advise. She paid for the wire and walked to her wagon and drove home. There was still working when she got back. Beam was up, not fully seated yet, braced in position, and he had started on the east roof decking while the beam dried in place. I told him what Fisher had said. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat back on the saw bench and looked at the ground between his boots for a moment. Aldrich, he said, you know the name? I know the position. Assessor controls property valuations. If he adjusts the Sutton assessment downward officially, their paper, it changes what a buyer has to pay in transfer taxes. Also gives Voss a legal basis to argue that his offer is fair market value. He looked up, and it means that if you try to sell to anyone else, the official valuation is already on record. It puts you in a weaker position no matter what you do. Vera looked at him. How do you know this? He was quiet. Noah. I spent time in the business of large property transactions, he said. The road. What kind of business? He stood up. He picked up a board and carried it to the barn wall as if the conversation were finished. Noah. Her voice was level. Not a demand, not a plea. I think in between that was harder to walk away from than either. He stopped. He set the board down against the wall and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, the expression of a man making a decision he'd been avoiding for days. There was a land developer, he said, in Pennsylvania. 8 years. I built projects, residential developments, special buildings, a canal extension. I partnered with a man named Garfield who handled the financial side while I managed construction. Well, he was good at money and I was good at building. And for 4 years it worked. He stopped. They waited. He was also good at fraud, Noah said. He'd been falsifying contracts and diverting funds for most of the partnership. Apart, he had documentation that made it look like I'd designed the scheme. But the documentation was convincing, and Garfield had 4 years of careful preparation, and I had nothing except my word. What happened? I was investigated. Charges didn't hold there. Wasn't enough direct evidence to make them stick. But it didn't matter. Everything we'd built together had my name on it. And once a man's name is associated with that kind of investigation, it doesn't matter what the verdict is. You lose your contracts. Your clients. You lose your standing. He paused. Lost everything I'd built in 8 years in about 3 months. Vera was very still. Then you left, she said. And then I left, he said. Because there was nothing left to stay for. The wind moved between them. Somewhere above them, a board on the half-repaired roof shifted in the gust. Who came to your property? Noah said. Voss. He uses the same pattern Garfield used. Get inside the official records first. Change the numbers on paper. By the time the landowner understands what's happening, documentation says something different than the truth. You recognized it, Vera said. First day, he said. When you told me 3 professional men all said the same thing. Numbers, men who should have had different assessments. That's not coincidence. Coordination. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at her. Because I just arrived. Because you had no reason to trust my reading of the situation. Because he stopped. Because what? Because I didn't know if I was seeing what was actually there, he said. If I was seeing Garfield's pattern everywhere, because I was the one who didn't see it in time. Vera looked at him for a long time. About 3 men who had all given her the same advice in different rooms. About a county record that had been pulled the day after Voss visited the office. About Dylan standing in her yard telling her kindly, helpfully, that she ought to think seriously about selling. About Noah Carter walking up her drive with a toolbox and a face that had been through something, and knowing in 45 seconds what was wrong with her barn. You're not seeing it wrong, she said. He looked at her. In his face eased. Just slightly, just enough. No, she said. You're seeing it exactly right. That night she wrote to Hargrove again. No wire this time, a letter. Long, specific, detailed. She listed every name, Voss, Dylan, Aldrich. She described the timing of each visit. She included the number on the back of Voss's card. She described Fisher's behavior and what he'd said in the last moment before she left. She sealed it and addressed it and set it by the door for the Morning Post. Then she sat at the table and thought about what Noah had told her. Years of work, a partnership, a betrayal so calculated that by the time it landed, he hadn't been able to prove his own innocence. And then 3 years on the road, fixing other people's broken things because his own name had been made into a liability. She understood for the first time why he'd said there was no version of that story that made good company on a long drive. Also understood why he'd driven the wagon the whole way to Gunderson's without saying a word about any of it. He had not wanted her sympathy. He had wanted to be useful. With that for a while. Then she turned the lamp down and went to bed. The next morning brought Ed Bremer again. He came earlier this time. She was barely finished with breakfast when she heard his wagon. She came out to find him standing at the gate, and his expression was different from last time. Last time he'd been proprietary, mildly offended. This time he looked like a man who had heard something and hadn't slept well since. To you, he said. Come in, she said. He came through the gate. He kept his voice low. Even though the yard was just the 2 of them, Noah was on the north side of the barn and out of earshot. Heard something in town yesterday, Ed said. About the county assessor's office. Tell me, Vera said. Word is Aldrich is doing a round of reassessments in this district. Properties that haven't been formally reviewed since before the territorial administration changed hands. Authority to adjust valuations based on current use and improvement status. Ed looked at her steadily. If he reassesses you low, it goes in the record. And whatever Voss offers, Ed says is fair. I know, Vera said. Ed stared at her. Since yesterday afternoon, she said. With Fisher at the land office, Ed was quiet for a moment. Told you? He told me enough. Ed sat down on the fence rail, fully, like his knees had decided the conversation was serious enough to require assistance. Remember, this is Voss's operation, he said. He's done it twice in the county north of here. Plus, the landowner sold inside of 6 months. All times, Aldrich's reassessment was on record before the sale went through. Vera looked at him. You know this, because Roy Crabtree's brother-in-law owns land in that county, Ed said. Told Roy last spring what happened up there. They told me, and neither of us connected it to anything closer until Voss showed up here Monday. Vera was very still. Crabtree, she said, who was one of the 3 men who came to give me estimates. Ed had the grace to look uncomfortable. Approach Roy as well? Vera said, I don't know, Ed said. I genuinely don't know, Vera. Roy might not even know he was being used. Vera looked at the barn, at the new timber visible in the framing, at the solid, patient work that had been going on for 2 weeks without drama or complaint. I've already written to Hargrove, she said. My father's lawyer. Then Billings. Ed blinked. Hargrove. Good, that's good. He stood up. Back at the barn again. Then at her. For what it's worth, I should have listened better when you told me the estimates were wrong. I assumed you were being stubborn about cost. I was being correct about value, Vera said. Ed slowly. Yes, he said. You were. Drove away. And Vera stood in the yard, and the understanding the speed that had been assembling itself in pieces since Monday morning was now nearly complete. Us had a system. The system required official documentation. Aldrich provided the documentation. Dillon was the advance man who conditioned the landowner to expect a sale. Roy Crabtree, whether he knew it or not, had been carrying the message that the property was financially distressed. She went to the north side of the barn. Noah was working the foundation corner. He looked up when she came around. Ed Bremer just told me something, she said. Tell him all of it. He listened. He did not stop working while she talked. He kept his hands moving, fitting stone against stone in the foundation repair. And she had learned by now that this was not dismissiveness. It was how he thought. His hands needed to move while his mind sorted. When she finished, he sat back on his heels and looked at the wall. Aldrich will come out to reassess, he said. Probably within 2 weeks. Maybe less if Voss is pushing the timeline. When he comes out, what does he need to see? Noah looked at her. He needs to see a property in poor condition. Maintenance, structural problems, depreciated value. He paused. He needs to see what this barn looked like before I started. Vera was quiet for a moment. He's going to see instead, she said slowly, barn that's been properly repaired with clear-grade Douglas fir beams and rebuilt foundation work. Yes, Noah said, which puts your property's actual value considerably above what Voss has offered, because an improved property can't be legally assessed below the cost of improvements. Noah looked at her with something she was beginning to recognize. Direct. The look he used when she'd understood something correctly. You came here at exactly the right time, she said. He stood up and dusted his hands on his trousers. I came here because you had work, he said. If I hadn't had work? He looked at her. The question sat between them for a moment, longer than was comfortable. I kept walking, he said. Vera held his gaze. Glad you didn't, she said. She said it simply, softening it or dressing it up, because she was 31 years old and she had stopped saying things at half volume when she was 22. Was very still for a moment. Then he picked up his tools and turned back to the foundation work. The reassessment, he said. You're going to need dated records of the improvements, receipts, delivery logs, anything that puts a timestamp on what was done and when. I have the Gunderson receipt, she said. Deposit record. Keep everything from here on, he said. Every nail, every board, dated in your own hand. I will, she went back inside, got out the account book and opened it to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. She listed every piece of timber, every supply, every transaction since Noah had arrived. Wrote Noah's name, his start date, the agreed terms. She wrote it all clearly and carefully, the way her father had taught her, because documentation was not just paperwork, they used to say. Documentation was the only argument that didn't depend on someone believing you. Outside, the hammer kept its rhythm. She worked until the lamp needed filling, and then she filled it and kept working. 3 days later, I came from Hargrove. She read it standing at the kitchen table in her coat from the ride back from the post office. Hargrove had heard of Voss. The Voss Land Company had registered 2 land purchases in the northern county in the past 18 months at prices significantly below assessed value. In both cases, the county assessor, not Aldrich, a different man in the northern district, had revised the assessments downward prior to sale. There had been a complaint filed against the assessor in one case. The complaint had been reviewed and dismissed. Dismissed, Grove noted, by the county commissioner, who had subsequently accepted a consulting fee from a construction company with known ties to the Voss organization. The letter ended with this: "I will make inquiries, but in the meantime, do not sign anything. If Aldrich comes to reassess, trust that he conduct the assessment in the presence of a witness of your choosing. You are entitled to this under territorial property law. Not refuse." Vera read it twice. Then she walked out to the barn and handed it to Noah. He read it once. Then he looked up. "A witness," he said. "Not choosing," she said. "That's legal, right? And who would you choose?" Vera looked at him. Back. "Vera," he said quietly, "if I'm present for an official county assessment, my name goes in the record." "Yes," she said. "My name," he said carefully, "has a history in property transactions that I have not finished explaining." "I know," she said. "This is thorough and he is thorough. He may find that history and use it." "That would require him to explain how he found it," Vera said, "why he was looking for it, which opens questions I suspect he doesn't want opened." Noah was quiet for a long moment. He handed the letter back. "I built 8 years of honest work," he said, "and it wasn't enough to protect me." "I know," Vera said. "You were wrong," he said, "in ways that hurt you, but not just me." Vera folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket. Looked at him steadily. "Noah," she said, "the barn is nearly repaired. The foundation is solid. The beams are in. You did that. You walked up my drive with $3 standing between me and losing this property. And you did the work and you kept my money and you told me the truth even when telling me the truth was harder than staying quiet." She paused. "I'm asking you to be my witness because you're the only person on this property who has never lied to me, even by omission. Not since we settled the terms." He looked at her for a long time. The wind was picking up. She could hear it moving through the new timber in the barn roof, a clean sound, airtight, solid. "The sound of work done right, all right," he said. She nodded. She turned toward the house. "Vera." She stopped. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not quite the way he looked when he was assessing the barn, like the way he looked when something she'd said surprised him. Some between the two. Something more open than either. "Garfield," he said. "The partner. He told me once that the most dangerous thing in a business arrangement was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth." He paused. "I think he was right," he said. "I just think he meant it as a warning, and I'm starting to think it's actually a compliment." Vera looked at him for one moment. "Both," she said. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table and pressed her hand flat on the surface and felt the solidity of it. Old wood. There's table, worn smooth in the places where his arms had rested for 30 years. Afraid. She was not unafraid either. She was something more honest than either of those. She was awake. More awake than she had been in 2 years. And she could hear the hammer resume outside, steady and certain and unhurried, and she told herself it meant nothing beyond what it was. A man doing his job, a barn being repaired. She almost believed it. Eric came on a Thursday. He came without warning. Vera he had not intended to give her time to prepare. He rode in on a county horse with a leather satchel across his saddle and the practiced manner of a man who had done this many times and found it entirely routine. He was 50s wire, with a neat gray beard and the kind of careful politeness that had learned to look like integrity. He led his horse at the gate and came up the drive and stopped when he saw Noah on the barn roof. He heard quickly, but not before Vera saw him stop. He said, "I'm Aldrich, county assessor, conducting a district-wide review of property valuations. Routine procedure under the Territorial Improvement Act." We'll need to walk the property and make a formal record of current condition. Vera had been expecting him for 4 days. Hargrove's letter in her coat pocket. She had her account book under her arm. "Yes," she said. "I've asked a witness to be present for the assessment. Under Territorial Property Law, Section 14, I'm entitled to that." Aldrich looked at her. That expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, very slightly, the way a door shifts when someone pushes against it from the other side. "Certainly," he said. "Who have you asked?" "My hired man," Vera said. "He's been managing the repair work and has direct knowledge of the property's current condition and improvement history." She raised her hand toward the barn. Noah was already coming down the ladder. Aldrich watched him descend. She watched Aldrich watch him. The assessor's eyes were doing the kind of arithmetic that had nothing to do with property values. Noah came and stood beside her. He was carrying nothing. Washed his hands and his face before coming down, which meant he'd known this moment was coming and had prepared for it quietly. "Her being asked, Mr. Carter," Aldrich said. "Mr. Aldrich," Noah said. Two men who had never met, looking at each other with the mutual recognition of people who understand exactly what the other one is doing there. "Will we begin?" Vera said. They walked the property, all of it. Aldrich with his satchel and his measuring tape and his notebook. Vera with her account book. Noah 2 steps behind, saying nothing unless Aldrich asked him a direct question, and then answering in the specific, unembellished way he answered everything. Aldrich asked about the north wall repair. Noah gave him the date it was started, the date the new sill plate was installed, and the grade and dimensions of the lumber used. Aldrich wrote it down. His pen moved a little more slowly than it had at the start. Aldrich asked about the main beams. Noah gave him the Gunderson receipt date, timber specification, the load time bearing calculation that justified the clear grade selection, calculation from memory board dimensions, length, load factor, without hesitation and without showing off. Aldrich stopped writing. He looked at Noah. "You have a formal background in structural engineering?" he said. "I have a practical background in construction," Noah said. "I've built enough structures to know what holds and what doesn't." Aldrich looked at his notebook, at the barn, then at Noah again. "The improvements documented here," he said carefully, "represent a significant investment in the property." "Yes," Noah said. "Oh, Miss Sutton," Aldrich turned to her. "I want to be transparent with you. My preliminary assessment of this property, based on records I reviewed prior to this visit, indicated a valuation of approximately $740. Vera said nothing. "Based on what I'm seeing today," Aldrich said, and his voice had changed not much, not enough. The way a man's voice changes when he is recalculating something quickly and doesn't want it to show, that figure will require revision. "Upward," Vera said. "A question." "Upward," Aldrich said. He closed his notebook. At the barn one more time, he looked at Noah. He looked at Vera. "I'll have the revised assessment filed within the week," he said. To his horse. He untied it. He rode back down the drive without looking back. Vera stood in the yard until the sound of hooves faded entirely. And she exhaled. Noah was beside her, still looking at the gate. "They came in expecting 740, she said. "He came in expecting to confirm 740, Noah said, "which is a different thing. He needed to see a property in distress, a property in recovery. What will he put in the record?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "Sure, he'll put in a number he can defend," he said, "because he can't put in 740 now. With the beam receipts and the Gunderson documentation in the file. If Grove ever looks at the record, the falsified number is the thing that proves the scheme. So he has to tell the truth," Vera said, "because the lie is too dangerous." "Yes," Noah said. Vera looked at her account book. She had written everything in it, every date, color, every decision, her father's habit, her mother's training, the plain, unglamorous work of writing things down before someone could tell you they didn't happen. "Back to Voss," she said. "Tonight, probably," Noah said. "Voss will try something else." "Yes." Vera turned toward the house. "Are you afraid?" she asked. She wasn't asking about Voss. He looked at her. He understood the question. Of what Voss might find about me, he said slowly. There's some. Do you want to tell me the rest of it before he does? It was the most direct thing she'd ever said to him. Sure. She felt the weight of it in the air between them. Quiet for a long moment. Not today, he said. Nodded. She didn't push. All right, she said. Sure. Soon, he said. She went inside. She set the account book on the table and opened it and read through everything she'd written and told herself it was enough. Documentation was solid. Hargrove was moving. The assessment would be honest. Herself, that was what mattered. She almost succeeded. Voss came back 6 days later. I'm alone this time. No flanking men, no silver watch chain on display. He came quietly in the early afternoon, and he tied his horse at the gate the way a man does when he's not planning to stay long and wants you to know it. Vera met him in the yard. She had known he was coming, the exact day, but she had known, the same way she'd known about every storm that had ever rolled in from the north. You could feel the pressure change before the clouds arrived. He said. His voice was different. The easy pleasantness was still there. It was thinner, like a coat worn one season too long. Hope you'll allow me a few minutes. I'll allow you 5, she said. Oh, it didn't reach his eyes. I understand the county assessment has been revised. It has. I'd like to revise my offer accordingly. Vera looked at him. You came to raise your offer. I came to have a conversation. That's not what you said, she said. No, Corners. You said you'd like to revise your offer. Those are different things. One of them involves a number. What's the number? Voss studied her for a moment. He had not expected her to skip the preamble. She could see him recalibrating. 1,100, he said. Vera said nothing. That's a significant increase from my initial. My father appraised this property at 1,100 3 years ago, Vera said. The water rights were confirmed. Before the north pasture fence was completed, the barn repairs which are now on record with the county. She paused. 1,100 is not a revised offer, Mr. Voss. It's the same insult with a different number on the front. Voss was very still. You've been advised, he said. It was not a question. I've been educated, Vera said. There's a difference. By your hired man. The way he said it, the slight weight he put on hired was precise and deliberate. It was designed to make her feel naive, to suggest that she was being guided by someone she didn't know well enough to trust. Oh, people, Vera said, including my father's lawyer in Billings. Voss paused for a fraction of a second, but she caught it. Hargrove, she said. You may know the name. Voss's expression changed again. It went through something she hadn't seen before, not anger exactly. Close. The look of a man who has just discovered the board he was standing on is shorter than he measured. He said. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the pleasantness. What was underneath was not threatening exactly. It was real in a way the pleasantness had not been. I'm going to help you. This property is under financial pressure. Winter is coming. You are running a working cattle operation alone. They're facts, not calculations on my part. They are facts, Vera agreed. And here is another fact. In the past 2 years, I have not missed a single tax payment, or debt obligation, or a single feed and supply account. I have repaired the primary structure on this property. I have retained legal counsel, and I have no intention of selling to anyone at any price that reflects what you think my situation is worth, rather than what my property actually is. She looked at him squarely. Is there anything else? Voss looked at her for a long moment. Look away. He reached into his coat. He produced a different card. Put it out. She took it this time. On the front was a number. She looked at it. She looked at him. Think about it, she said. He nodded. He went to his horse. He mounted without hurry. You're hired, man, he said. From the saddle. I'd be careful about how much you rely on his judgment. A man with his history in property transactions is not always the most reliable guide. He rode away. Rated. Vera stood in the yard and looked at the card in her hand. 1,300. He had moved $400 in one visit, which meant the real value was higher than 1,300. Over. There was nothing on the back this time. She heard Noah's footsteps coming around the barn. She did not turn around immediately. She needed one moment to put her face in order. What did he say at the end? Noah said. He had been close enough to hear the last exchange. Nurse. She turned. He told me to be careful about relying on your judgment, or that your history and property transactions made you unreliable. Noah's expression did not change. He said, yes. How much do you know? He said. My history. What you've told me, she said. I believe. And what Voss just implied, which I don't. Noah looked at the gate where Voss had disappeared. There was a newspaper account, he said, in the Pittsburgh papers. When the investigation happened, my name was in it. Charges were eventually dismissed, but the article ran before the dismissal. He paused. Articles about charges run on the front page. Articles about dismissals run on page 7. Vera absorbed that. Who searched your name would find the charges, she said, and would have to look harder to find the outcome. Yes, and Voss is betting you won't tell me before he does. Noah looked at her. He's betting that if you hear it from him first, it changes how you see everything I've told you. Vera was quiet. Is it? He said, straight out with no buffer. The most direct question she'd ever heard him ask. She looked at him for a long moment, at his face, which was exactly what it had always been. At his hands, which had fixed everything on her property that was broken. At the barn behind him, standing solid and square in the afternoon light, repaired to a standard that the 3 men with their estimates had said would cost twice what she'd paid. Oh, she said. One word. Flat and certain. Noah exhaled. It was the smallest sound, but she heard it. What are you going to do about the offer? He said. Nothing yet, she said. Hargrove is still working. 1,300 tells me the real number is higher still. It might be much higher, Noah said. If there's a rail survey in this district. Vera looked at him. You've been thinking about that since the first day, he said. A direction. The grade of the land, the water access, the rail line plan for the corridor, the properties along it are worth. He stopped. He shook his head once. More than 1,300. How do we find out? Territorial Land Office in Billings, he said. Rail surveys are public record once they're filed. Hargrove can check. Vera pulled Hargrove's card from her pocket and turned it over and wrote on the back, Rail survey this corridor. Check territorial record. File date and route. She looked up. Noah was watching her write, with the expression he'd had at Gunderson's mill, the one she'd learned to read as respect. When did you start trusting me? He said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. Oh, by the way, his jaw set slightly after. About it honestly. The sill plate, she said. Before you'd been here 3 days. You told me when you didn't have to. A man who is here to take advantage of someone doesn't volunteer extra problems. He was quiet. Latch the gate, she said. The first day. Most men don't latch a gate they haven't been asked to latch. Something moved through his face. She didn't try to name. That's a small thing, he said. All things are what's left when the big ones don't tell you what you need to know, she said. Hard back in her pocket. Finish the east roof section, she said. It done before the next rain. End of the week, he said. She went to the house. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote the letter to Hargrove Rail Survey, her door, file date, and sealed it and set it by the door. Then she sat for a while with her hands flat on the table. Voss had moved to 1,300. He would move again. He'd be like that always moved again because they had calculated that the cost of moving was still less than the cost of the prize, which meant the prize was larger than she knew. And Noah, she turned that over carefully, the way she turned everything over that mattered. A man with a damaged name in the Eastern papers, a man who had been honest with her about that damage before she had to ask him directly. A man who had looked at her property and named every problem before he had any reason to. She trusted him. That was not a small thing. That was the largest thing she had done in 2 years. Her call from Hargrove came back in 8 days. And when Vera read it at the kitchen table, her hand went still on the page. There was a rail survey, filed 6 months ago with the Territorial Land Office in Billings. The survey mapped a corridor through Harlan County, running northeast to southwest along the valley floor. And route crossed through property. One of them was already under contract to the Voss Land Company. One of them was a property whose owner had sold and relocated north the previous spring. Third was the Sutton property. Hargrove had written, "The company is the northern mountain line." They filed a right-of-way application in March. Voss Land Company, registered as an interested land partner in April. Practice land companies acquire the corridor properties before the route is announced publicly, then sell the right-of-way to the rail company at a substantial premium. The property sits directly in the survey corridor. Estimated right-of-way value, based on comparable transactions, $1,800 and $2,200. This is separate from the property's total assessed value. Vera set the letter down. She pressed both hands flat on the table. $1,800, $2,200 for the right-of-way alone. Voss had offered her $800. He had come back with $1,300. And the whole time, he had known. He had known exactly what the land was worth, exactly what the rail company would pay, and he had been trying to buy her out for less than half of it. She sat at the table for a long time without moving. Then she got up. She walked out to the barn. Noah was on the roof, laying the final course of shingles on the east section. Was nearly done. In the afternoon light, it looked exactly like what it was, a thing repaired properly by someone who knew what they were doing. Plus, she said. He looked down. She held up the letter. He came down the ladder. He took the letter and read it. She watched his face as he read the careful stillness, and then something shifting underneath it, and then a tightening along his jaw that was not anger. The expression of a man who had been right about something and found no satisfaction in being right, because being right came at someone else's expense. Handed the letter back. $1,800 minimum, she said. Probably higher, he said. Hargrove's estimate is conservative. Rail companies pay for disruption as well as access. Negotiate, so Voss's $1,300, she said. That's still less than the right-of-way value alone, Noah said. Yes. He was going to make $900 on the land deal and then resell the right-of-way on top of it, Vera said. I had taken $800. Noah said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vera looked at the barn, at the new roof, solid and squared, the repaired north wall, at the foundation work, along the base that would hold for 30 years if it was maintained. Not selling, she said. No, Noah said. I'm going to contact the rail company directly, she said. Hargrove can arrange it. I'll negotiate the right-of-way myself and cut Voss out entirely. Noah was quiet for a moment. We'll make Voss angry, he said. Yes, Vera said. I expect it will. He'll push back. I expect that too, Vera. His voice was careful. Like Voss get cut out of a deal they've been building for 6 months. Walk away cleanly. They find pressure points. She looked at him. Pressure points does he have? She said. Noah held her gaze. She understood you, she said quietly. My name, he said. Public record. The newspaper account. If he can make it look like you were advised by someone with a fraudulent history in property deals, calls your own judgment into question. It complicates the legal process. It gives him grounds to challenge any agreement you reach with the rail company. Vera was very still. How do you do that? She said. Legally? He could file a complaint, Noah said. Probably wouldn't hold, but it would delay. And delay is sometimes enough. The wind moved through the new roof. Clean sound again. Solid. Then we need to move faster than he can file, Vera said. How quickly can Hargrove contact the rail company? If you wire him today, Noah said. A week, maybe 10 days. All right, Vera said. Turned toward the house. Vera. She stopped. I'm the pressure point, Noah said. Then I'm the problem. But you'd protect yourself better if I wasn't here when Voss pushes back. She turned around slowly. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his face very composed and his eyes doing something complicated. You're suggesting you leave, she said. I'm telling you it would be cleaner, he said. For you. Vera looked at him for a long time. She thought about the sill plate, about clear gray Douglas fir and the reasons behind the choice, about a man who had not looked at her with pity or condescension or proprietary concern since the first moment he walked through her gate, about Garfield and Pennsylvania, and 3 years on the road, and a newspaper article that ran before the page 7 retraction, about what it meant to ask someone to leave because their presence made things complicated. She knew what it meant. Her former fiancé had decided she was a complication. He simplified accordingly. No, she said. Noah looked at her. She said again, you stay. We move faster than Voss can. And if he files a complaint, we respond to it with the truth, which we have documented, and with Hargrove's counsel, which we have retained. She took a breath. I did not ask you to stay on this property to send you away the first time it cost something. He was very still. I told you once, she said, that I fought Ed Bremer's concern for me, not for you. This is different. I'm asking you to stay because the work isn't finished and because I want you here. She paused. Honest. The wind shifted. The new timber in the barn roof moved just slightly. Noah looked at her for a long moment, at her face, which she had stopped trying to compose. All right, he said. His voice was quiet, different from how it usually sounded. She said, wire Hargrove today. From town. Tell him to contact the Northern Mountain Line as soon as possible. Use my name, not yours. Understood, he said. She turned toward the house, took the full length of the yard, and went inside and closed the door and stood with her back against it for one moment. No, had told him she wanted him here. She had meant the barn, the work, the knowledge he carried. She had also meant the other thing, the thing that had been growing since the drive to Gunderson's mill. Since the evening he'd told her about Pennsylvania. In the morning, she'd watched him come down the ladder and stand beside her against Aldrich without being asked. She had meant all of it, and she had no idea what to do with that. She pushed off from the door. She went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and put it on the stove and made herself think only about the rail survey in Hargrove and what came next. It was loud. The hammer on the barn roof was louder. Listen to both. 2 days later, Noah came back from town with a look on his face she hadn't seen before. He came in through the kitchen door, which he had never done, always knocked and waited, and he was carrying a folded newspaper. She stood up from the table. He set the newspaper in front of her and pointed to a column on the second page. Former partner in Pennsylvania, fraud investigation now working, Harlan County property. I read the rest of it, standing up without sitting back down. It was brief, 7 sentences. It named Noah Carter. It referenced the Pittsburgh investigation, not the dismissal. It described him as a former business associate under investigation for financial fraud in property development. He was currently employed at a ranch outside Harlan and suggested that local property owners should be aware of his presence in the county. There was the Harlan County Register. When did this run? She said. Yesterday's edition, Noah said. It was in the post office when I went for the wire. Vera set the paper down. She looked at Noah. His face was composed, but she knew his face well enough now to read past composed. Underneath it, he looked exactly like a man who had been here before, who had watched his name become a weapon in someone else and had not been fast enough to stop it. Us, she said. He didn't write it, Noah said. Someone gave the register the information. The same information. Omission. Can we respond? A letter to the editor, Hargrove? We can. It'll run in next week's edition, which gives it 7 days to do damage first, she said. Vera looked at the paper again. 7 sentences. A dismissal, no outcome. Just a name and a suggestion. It took. She made a decision. She made it the way she made most decisions quickly, completely, without consulting anyone else. Because in her experience, the decisions you second-guessed into the ground were always worse than the ones you made cleanly and stood behind. Oh, she said. Noah looked at her. Where are we going? To the register office, she said. Vera, if they ran it once, a correction, she said. Or I'll ask them publicly, or in their own office, why they published a story with a material omission. The dismissal of the charges is a matter of public record. If their reporter missed it, that's negligence. If he chose to omit it, that's something else. Noah was very still. You're going to walk into a newspaper office and challenge the editor on my behalf, he said. My behalf, she said, because it's my land and my decisions they're questioning. Because you have the date of the dismissal and the name of the court and the case reference, and I want that information in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. Something passed through his face, something that wasn't surprise exactly, because he had stopped being surprised by her days ago, but was close to it. Something that was more like a man realizing the ground he was standing on was more solid than he'd believed it was. The case reference? She said. Yes, he said. Then get your coat, she said. We're losing daylight. He got his coat. They went to town, and Vera Sutton did not look back once on the drive and not at the barn, not at the property, not at anything behind her. She looked at the road ahead, and she drove, and beside her Noah Carter rode in silence with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the horizon. Neither of them said anything at all, but somewhere between the gate and the first-mile marker, his hand moved on the bench seat, just slightly, not toward her. Open. She did not reach for it, but she noticed it. And that was the moment everything changed. The register office was on the main street, wedged between the telegraph office and a dry goods store that had been there since, before Harlan had a proper name. The editor's name was Pruitt. Vera knew him the way she knew most people in town by sight, his reputation, by the things he had printed and the things he had chosen not to. She pushed open the door without knocking. Pruitt was at his desk, a compact man in his late 50s with ink-stained fingers and the particular wariness of someone that people who came through his door without knocking were rarely bringing good news. He looked at Vera. He looked at Noah behind her. Something moved across his face. He said. Mr. Pruitt, she said. I'd like to discuss the item you ran in yesterday's edition. Column 2, page 3. 7 sentences about my hired man. Pruitt set down his pen. He folded his hands on the desk with the deliberateness of a man buying himself time. The item was submitted as a public notice, he said. Public notices as a service to the community. Submitted by whom? Vera said. It paused. The notices are submitted anonymously. The standard practice. Anonymous, Vera said. A man's name and professional reputation in a county newspaper, submitted by someone who didn't put their own name to it. The information was verifiable, Pruitt said. The investigation was a matter of public record. The investigation was, Vera said. The dismissal of all charges was also a matter of public record. It was not included in your item. Pruitt looked at Noah, met his gaze, and said nothing. I wasn't aware, Pruitt began. The dismissal was filed in the Allegheny Court of Common Pleas, Noah said. His voice was level. Case number 47-1880. Of that year. It's in the public record, the same as the investigation. Who verified the investigation would have found the dismissal in the same file. Pruitt's expression shifted. He was a man who had spent 30 years reading other people's faces, and he was reading Noah's now, reading the specificity, absence of anger, the flat certainty of a man stating facts he had lived rather than constructed. Run a correction, he said. In this week's edition, Vera said. Next week's. This week's has already gone to press. Then you'll print an insert, Vera said. One column. The correction runs the same size as the original item. Third page. Pruitt looked at her. That's what a newspaper that serves this community does when it runs an incomplete account, Vera said. Liz. Silence. Pruitt picked up his pen, put it down again. He looked at Noah. Who submitted the notice? Noah said quietly. I have to print it. I'm just asking. Pruitt was quiet for a long moment. It came through an intermediary, he said finally. A man named Dillon. He said he worked for the county improvement office. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water. Vera did not look at Noah. She didn't need to. The insert runs this week, she said. Write the correction myself and have it to you by tomorrow morning. Pruitt nodded once. Agreement exactly. But it was not refusal either. She turned and walked out. Noah followed. They were halfway to the wagon when she heard Pruitt's door open behind them. Sutton, she turned. Pruitt was standing in his doorway with his hands in his vest pockets and an expression she hadn't expected to see on him, something that looked very much like discomfort with himself. Told me the man had a history the county needed to know about, Pruitt said. It was a public service. I should have checked the full record before I ran it. He paused. Sorry. Vera looked at him. The insert runs this week, she said again. Oh, Pruitt said. She got into the wagon. Noah climbed up beside her. She picked up the reins, and they rolled out onto the main street, and neither of them said anything for 2 full blocks. Noah said, "You didn't have to do that." "I told you before," Vera said. "I do things for me, not for you." He was quiet. "That's not entirely true today," she said. "Look at her." "No," she said. "It isn't." She drove them out of town and back toward the property. And the afternoon light was long and flat across the valley. The road home was the same road it always was, except that something had shifted along it. And she could feel it the same way she could feel weather not yet arrived. She wrote the correction that night. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied. The first version was too angry. The second was too careful. The third was plain and specific and said exactly what needed saying without a single word of performance. It named the case. It named the court. It named the outcome. Third, it noted that the original item had omitted material public information. I did not speculate about why. She signed it, Vera Sutton, Sutton Ranch, Harlan County, not on behalf of my hired man, in defense of someone in my employ. She signed it with her own name and her own property because this was her county and her newspaper and her community. And if she was going to stand for something, she was going to do it in plain sight with her name on it. She slid the paper into an envelope and sealed it and set it by the door with the lamp still burning. Then she sat back down at the table and allowed herself, for the first time since Monday, to think about what came next. Us had played the newspaper. Dylan had been the hand that passed the note. Her system was still moving, just through a different channel now. Aldrich had been forced to revise the assessment upward. The correct offer approach had failed. The newspaper item was now going to be publicly corrected. Us was running out of moves, which was when men like that became dangerous. When they were advancing, when they were cornered. About that for a while. She turned down the lamp and went to bed and slept better than she had in 2 weeks, which surprised her until she realized why. She had made the decision at Pruitt's office the same way she'd made every real decision in her life completely, without hedging, with her name on it. And decisions like that, they're once made, had a way of quieting the noise. The noise being the part of her mind that had been asking, us first wrote up her drive. What are you going to do? She knew now she was going to hold. The wire from Hargrove came the next morning. Southern Mountain Line confirms interest in right-of-way negotiation. Company representative will travel from Billings. Expect contact within 10 days. Discuss terms with any third party prior to meeting. H 10 days. She was in the yard reading the wire when Ed Bremer came up the drive. He had the look of a man who had seen the newspaper and had been carrying it since. What Pruitt ran, Ed said. He had his hat in his hands. Your correction notice go in this morning. It was at the post office. Good, Vera said. People are talking, he said. Vera said. That's not new. They're talking about Carter specifically, Ed said. Whether he should be on the property. Vera looked at Ed steadily. What do you think? Ed turned his hat in his hands. Quiet for a moment, the real kind of quiet, kind that meant he was actually thinking rather than just pausing. I think, he said slowly, that the barn is in better shape than it's been in 15 years. I think you've handled Voss better than any man in this county has so far. And you've done it with Carter's help. He looked up, called it, and I think the newspaper printed something completely, and you called it out. That was more than most people would have the spine to do. Vera waited. Are going to want to know who he is, Ed said. They do. They're going to fill the space with whatever they imagine. Then let them come and look, Vera said. Who wants to see the work he's done on this property is welcome to come and look at it. Anderson receipts are in my account book. The county assessment revision is on file. Someone wants to understand what kind of man Noah Carter is. They can come here and see what he's built. Ed looked at the barn. Looked at the north wall straight, solid, the foundation work visible along the base. Trust him, Ed said. It was not an accusation. Vera said. Ed put his hat back on. He nodded once. Slowly, the way men do, when they've decided to stop arguing with something that's already been decided. Right. He said, I'll say what needs saying to the right people. I'd appreciate it, she said. He drove away. She turned and found Noah standing at the barn door. Sure. He had heard all of it. You didn't have to say that either, he said. Vera said, yes. Stop telling me what I didn't have to do. He was quiet for a moment. Something she hadn't seen from him before the corner of his mouth moved. Touch. But it was there. All right, he said. Good, she said. The east fence line needs checking before winter. Can you do that this afternoon? Yes, he said. She went inside. She was smiling by the time she got to the kitchen table. And she made herself stop, and then she gave up trying to stop and just let it be. The next 6 days were almost quiet. Almost because quiet on the Sutton property meant Noah on the roof or the fence line, Vera at the accounts and correspondence, Hargrove moving in Billings, Carroll County doing the slow, particular work of deciding what it thought about a woman who had published a correction in the newspaper with her own name on it. The Register ran the insert on Thursday. Pruitt wrote a brief editorial note alongside it acknowledging that the original item had been incomplete and that the Register regretted the omission. Not named Dylan. But the editorial note was there. It was more than Vera had asked for, and told her that Pruitt's discomfort with himself was genuine. On Saturday, Roy Crabtree came to the property. He came alone, and he came on foot, which meant he had walked a mile and a half from his own land, which meant he had decided this was not a wagon ride conversation. There was on the fence line. Vera was in the yard. Crabtree stopped at the gate. He was a big man, red-faced from the walk, with the look of someone who had been rehearsing what he was going to say and was now not sure any of it was right. In explanation, he said. Come in, Vera said. He came through the gate. He stood in the yard with his hands at his sides. Dylan came to me in August, Crabtree said. He told me the county was doing an improvement review and asked if I'd give an honest assessment of neighboring properties I'd worked near. It was routine. He asked me about your property specifically. I told him it was in poor shape after the storm. I told him the repair costs would be significant for a single woman running the operation alone. He paused. I didn't know what he was going to use it for. Vera looked at him. Did he pay you, she said. Crabtree's face went red. Oh, he said. I had to ask, Vera said. I absorbed that. No. He didn't pay me. He told me it was for county planning purposes. I believed him. Because you had no reason not to, Vera said. I should have asked more questions, Crabtree said. I know that now. Vera was quiet for a moment. What did you tell your brother-in-law? She said. When you heard about Voss working the northern county. Crabtree looked at her. Exactly what Dylan had done. And I told him I was sorry I'd been part of it without knowing. And then you didn't come tell me, Vera said. Hers were flat, not cruel, just accurate. Crabtree looked at the ground. Oh, he said. I told myself you'd found your own way through it. Myself, it wasn't my place. He looked up. That was wrong. Vera considered him for a moment. She said. But you're here now. Yes. The county commissioner, she said, who dismissed the complaint against the northern assessor. Do you know his name? Crabtree blinked. He had not expected the conversation to move that direction. Oh, he said. Thomas Burrell. And does Burrell have a relationship with the Voss Land Company? Crabtree was quiet for a long moment. No, he accepted a fee from a survey company last spring. I know the survey company did work for Voss. I know because my brother-in-law looked into it after the sale went through, and he wished he hadn't waited. Vera filed that. Thank you, she said, for coming. Crabtree looked at the barn. Really looked at it. That's good work, he said. Yes, Vera said. It is. He walked back down the drive and through the gate and pulled it closed behind him. Vera stood in the yard and watched him go and thought about Roy Crabtree, who had been used as a tool without knowing it and had spent 2 months not saying anything about it, and had finally come on foot because the weight of it had gotten heavier than his silence. She was not angry at him. She was something more complicated than angry. Of how easy it was for a system like Voss's to move through ordinary people without their knowledge and use their ordinary honesty as a mechanism. Crabtree had told the truth to a man he trusted. His truth had been weaponized and had been turned on her. She heard footsteps and turned. Had come back from the fence line. He looked at her face. Crabtree, he said. He didn't know, she said. Dylan used him. Noah nodded slowly. Burrell took a fee from a company connected to Voss, she said, after he dismissed the complaint in the northern county. Noah looked at her carefully. Not property law anymore, he said. That's corruption in public office. I know, Vera said. Hargrove needs to know it too. If you take that to Hargrove, Noah said, Hargrove takes it to a territorial authority. This becomes much larger than your property. I know that too, Vera said. It becomes more dangerous, he said. Voss has been doing this quietly. If someone threatens to expose the Burrell connection, he won't stay quiet. Vera looked at him steadily. Is that a reason not to do it? Noah looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. It isn't. Good, she said. Write it up. Everything you know about how the scheme works. The full pattern Dylan, the advanced visit, the assessor adjustment, third-party information gathering, a paper item. All of it in your own hand with dates. Hargrove can use it alongside what Crabtree told me and what Fisher told me. Noah was quiet. Building a case, he said. I'm building a record, Vera said. Which is what you do when someone tries to take something from you. You make sure the truth is on paper before they can replace it with something else. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to know best on his face, the one that was not quite admiration and not quite wonder, but was close to both. I'll write it tonight, he said. Thank you, she said. There. She went inside. The representative from the Northern Mountain Line arrived on a Wednesday. His name was Alderman. He was younger than Vera had expected, mid-30s, sharp-featured, with the efficient manner of a man who traveled constantly and had learned to establish credibility quickly because he rarely had time for the slow version. Well, he came with Hargrove, who had ridden down from Billings specifically for this meeting, and who shook Vera's hand at the gate with the warmth of a man discharging a long-standing debt. Vera would have liked this, Hargrove said quietly. The way you've handled it, Vera said. Tell me that after we've finished. They sat at the kitchen table, Vera, Hargrove, and Alderman, with the account book and the Hargrove letters and the wire confirmations spread out between them. Was not in the room. He had offered to stay outside, and Vera had let him because this was her negotiation and she needed to do it alone. She had his written account in the account book as supporting documentation. The recorders, she did not need him in the room. Alderman looked at everything she had laid out. He was thorough. He asked precise questions. She answered them. Asked about the Voss approach. She told him. He asked about the assessment revision. She told him. He asked about the newspaper item. She told him. Alderman looked at Hargrove. Hargrove looked at Vera. Their mountain line. Alderman said carefully, Edward is aware that the Voss Land Company has been operating in this corridor. We contracted with Voss last year for property acquisition services. Contract has become problematic. Vera went very still. Problematic how? She said. Voss represented to us that the properties in the corridor could be acquired within a certain price range, Alderman said. The methods he used to bring properties within that range were not disclosed to us and are not consistent with how Northern Mountain Line conducts business. He paused. I made the agreement with Voss Land Company 10 days ago. The room was very quiet. Years ago, Vera said slowly. Before you came here? Yes, Alderman said. Which means Voss knew you were coming, she said. Because he knew his contract had been terminated. And he knew what that meant for his ability to profit from properties in this corridor. Alderman nodded carefully. That's why he escalated, she said. The newspaper item, 1,300, all of it. He was running out of time because you were already pulling away from him. That would be consistent with what we've observed, Alderman said. Vera sat back. She thought about the moment on the drive to town when she had looked at the horizon and felt the pressure change. She had been right. She had felt the storm before it arrived. There's the right-of-way value for the Sutton Corridor section, she said. Herman looked at his papers. He named a number. It was $2,100 of way alone. Vera looked at it without letting her face change. Number is negotiable, she said. Alderman looked at her. In a range, he said. I'd like to hear the range, she said. They negotiated for an hour and 40 minutes. Hargrove sat beside her and said almost nothing. Because Vera didn't need him to say anything, she knew what the land was worth. She knew what the right-of-way was worth. She knew what the inconvenience of construction access and noise and disruption was worth to a working cattle operation. About all of it, the night before, carefully, alone at the kitchen table with the lamp turned up, when they reached an agreement, the number was $2,350. The right-of-way. The property remained hers. Alderman shook her hand. He shook Hargrove's hand. He went to his horse. Hargrove looked at Vera across the table. $350, he said. Yes, Vera said. Voss offered you $800, Hargrove said. Heard, Vera said. Yes. Hargrove shook his head slowly. How would I know? Vera said. He left 20 minutes later with the signed paperwork and a copy of Noah's written account and Vera's documented record of every contact with Voss, Dillon and Aldrich, all of which he was going to take to a territorial attorney he knew, who had been looking for exactly this kind of documented case. The kitchen was quiet. Vera sat at the table alone for a moment, up and went outside. Noah was at the fence, playing the last section of the east line. He looked up when he heard her. She walked to him. She stopped a few feet away. $2,350, she said. Editor. For the right-of-way, she said. Property stays mine. Something happened to his face. The small, almost smile she'd seen before. Something larger and less controlled. A man who had been holding his breath for a long time and had finally let it go. He said. The barn is done, she said. He looked at her. Roof is finished, she said. The beams are in. The foundation is solid. The east fence line is. She glanced at the post in his hands. Nearly, he said. When it's done, she said. Job is done. He was very still. Is that what you want? He said. His voice was careful, the careful of a man who already knows the answer he's hoping for and is afraid of being wrong. Vera said. It is not what I want. The wind moved between them. Somewhere up the fence line, a post creaked in the cold. I'm not good at this, he said. At staying. I've spent 3 years getting better at leaving because staying felt like something I'd lost the right to. And now, she said, here for a long moment. Now he said, I don't want to leave. She looked at him, at his face, which was more open than she had ever seen it, at his hands, which had built something here that would last 30 years if anyone bothered to maintain it. She said, simpler than she'd intended. She had stopped saying things at half volume a long time ago. One step toward her. She did not step back. And then Ed Brimmer's wagon came rattling up the road at a pace that Ed Brimmer's wagon had never in Vera's memory traveled. And Ed was standing on the footboard instead of sitting there, and he was shouting something she couldn't make out yet. Noah turned. Ed pulled up at the gate, hard his face, the color of a man who had run part of the way. Ed said. He's at the land office right now. Filing an injunction against the right-of-way agreement. Says it was negotiated with fraudulent counsel. He's naming Carter specifically. His lawyer's already in there with Aldrich. Vera looked at Noah. His face had gone back to composed. The open thing was gone. In its place was the particular stillness of a man who had been here before, who had watched everything he was building get used against him and had learned not to show what it cost. Long ago, Vera said. 20 minutes, Ed said. Maybe less. Vera looked at the paperwork folded in her coat pocket. Right-of-way agreement. The documented account. Everything in order, everything dated, everything in her name. Looked at Noah. Get in the wagon, she said. Vera, he's going after the agreement, she said. The agreement I signed, my name, not yours. He cannot invalidate my agreement by attacking your character. He's going to try, and we need to be standing in that office before Aldrich puts anything in the record. Noah held her gaze. The injunction, he said. If it's already filed, then we answer it today, she said. With Noah Carter's dismissal papers from the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, which you have memorized, and with Hargrove contact information in Billings, and with a signed right-of-way agreement from the Northern Mountain Line that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with me. She put her hand on the fence post between them. Voss is not going to take this from me. Not today. Noah looked at her hand on the post, at her face. Then he set down his tools and walked to the wagon. Ed was already turning the horses, and Vera Sutton climbed up onto that wagon seat with $2,350 worth of signed paperwork in her coat and a clarity so sharp it felt like cold water. And she did not look back at the barn or the fence, property that had kept her here through everything. She looked at the road ahead. Whatever Voss had filed it against a woman he had badly misjudged from the first Monday he rode up her drive. To find out exactly how badly. Ed drove fast and said nothing. Told Vera he understood that the time for talking was already behind them. The paperwork inside her coat with one hand and gripped the wagon bench with the other and thought through exactly what she was walking into. Voss's lawyer was already inside. Aldrich was the assessor, which meant he was the ranking county official present for any land record dispute. If the injunction was filed and Aldrich accepted it before she arrived, it would go into the official record as pending, which meant the right-of-way agreement would be frozen, which meant the Northern Mountain Line would be unable to act on it, which meant Voss had bought himself time. Time was what men like Voss used instead of truth. She was not going to give him the time. Ed pulled up in front of the land office, and she was out of the wagon before it had fully stopped. Was beside her in 2 steps. She pushed through the door. Aldrich was at the front counter. Beside him stood a man she didn't recognize, 50s, faced with a leather document case under his arm and the carefully neutral expression of a lawyer who had been hired to do something he knew was questionable and had decided professionalism was sufficient armor. Behind him, near the window, stood Harlan Voss. Voss looked at her when she came in. He looked at Noah. Something moved through his face, calculation, reassessment, and underneath both of those, something that might have been the first genuine unease she had seen on him. Aldrich looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not hostile, not welcoming. The expression of a man caught precisely in the middle of something. Miss Sutton, Voss's lawyer, said. He introduced himself. She did not retain the name. We filed an application for injunctive relief against the right-of-way agreement, registered this morning under your name. Their position is that the agreement was reached with material input from a party whose history and property transactions creates grounds for... Stop, Vera said. The lawyer stopped. The agreement was signed by me, Vera said. Hear my name, on my property. The Northern Mountain Line representative negotiated with me directly. There's lawyer, Hargrove of Billings, was present as counsel. At no point in the negotiation did Noah Carter speak, or participate. He was outside on the fence line. She looked at Aldrich. Mr. Aldrich, before you accept this injunction, filing into the county record, I want you to understand what you're doing. You'd be accepting a challenge to a legally executed agreement between a private landowner and a railroad company on the basis that a hired laborer who was not present at the negotiation might have influenced it. Aldrich looked at the lawyer. The lawyer looked at Voss. Voss said nothing. He was looking at Vera with the expression of a man who had been certain of his ground and is now less certain. The grounds for the injunction, the lawyer said carefully. Prior relationship between Miss Sutton and prior relationship, Vera said. He has worked on my property for 6 weeks repairing a barn. That is the entirety of the relationship. And if that constitutes grounds to challenge a woman's ability to negotiate her own land agreements without a man's interference, like that argument put in writing before Mr. Aldrich so that the territorial court can review it directly. The lawyer blinked. Aldrich made a sound that was not quite a cough. Mr. Aldrich, Noah said. Everyone in the room looked at him. It was the first time he had spoken. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He set it on the counter. That is a certified copy of the dismissal of all charges filed in the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas in September of 1880. Case number 47-1880. It was filed at the same court where the investigation was initiated and is a matter of public record. If the grounds for this injunction rest on my history in property transactions, the document establishes that no fraudulent activity was found or established against me in any jurisdiction. He looked at Voss's lawyer. I'd suggest you read it before you ask Mr. Aldrich to put your filing in the county record. Because if you proceed with a claim you know to be factually incomplete, well, that's a different kind of legal problem than the one you came here to create. The room was very quiet, but watched the lawyer's face. She watched him calculate. She watched him reach the calculation. He looked at Voss. Voss was looking at the document on the counter, at the certification seal. His face. Something left Voss's expression in that moment. It did not leave all at once. It went the way air goes out of something punctured quietly, steadily, until what was left was smaller and less certain than what had been there before. Aldrich picked up the document. He read it. He set it back down. "Us," Mr. Aldrich said. His voice was careful. "I'm going to recommend that you consult with your lawyer before I accept this filing. The grounds appear to require clarification." Voss looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just decided which side of a line he is standing on. "Clarification," Voss said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "This office accepts filings that are well-founded. Be certain this one is." He paused. "Given the recent revision to the Sutton assessment, and given the documentation Miss Sutton has presented, would want the grounds established very clearly before anything goes into the permanent record." The lawyer put his hand on his document case. Voss. Voss was very still. Then he said, "Review the filing." He walked to the door. There followed. Neither of them looked at Vera or Noah as they passed. The door closed. Aldrich stood at the counter for a moment. Then he looked at Vera. "The right-of-way agreement is in the record," he said. "Called this morning, unchallenged." Vera looked at him for a long moment. "Aldrich," she said, "the record you reviewed before you came to my property, and that showed a valuation of $740. Aldrich met her gaze. "Who gave you that record?" she said. Aldrich was quiet. "Dylan," he said, one word. Very quiet. "Was Dylan working for Voss when he gave it to you?" she said. Aldrich looked down at the counter, then back up. "I didn't know that at the time," he said. "I believed it was a routine county matter." "And now," she said, "was a long one, the kind that means a man is deciding how much truth he can afford." Aldrich said, "I believe I was used as part of a scheme I didn't fully understand. I believe the revised assessment I filed is correct. I believe this office's records should reflect the truth of this property's value." He paused once more. "Sorry, Miss Sutton, for the part I played in it, regardless of whether I understood what it was." Vera looked at him for a moment. About what it cost a man like Aldrich to say that in a room where it could be witnessed. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that." She picked up the certified dismissal document from the counter and handed it back to Noah, but to Ed, who had come in behind them and had stood against the back wall through all of it with his hat in his hands and his eyes wide. "Home," she said. They drove back in the same silence they'd driven in. It was a different silence, the kind that comes after something has broken open and the air has changed, and nobody wants to be the first one to speak because whatever they say will be the first thing said in a new version of the day. Ed dropped them at the gate. He drove away without ceremony, which was the most respectful thing he could have done. Vera and Noah stood at the gate. She looked at the barn, the straight roof line, at the north wall, at the foundation work along the base, lit in the afternoon light. "It's done," she said. Vera looked at the barn too. "Yes," he said. She turned toward the house. She had letters to write to Hargrove, confirming the morning's outcome. Territorial attorney, Hargrove had mentioned, with the full documented record of Voss and Dillon and Burrell, to the northern mountain line, confirming the agreement was unchallenged. Work to do. There was always work to do. She was halfway across the yard when Noah said her name. She stopped. She turned. He was standing at the gate with the afternoon light behind him and his hands at his sides, looked the way she imagined. He had looked the morning. He understood that Garfield had taken everything not broken, not defeated, but stripped of something he hadn't known he was relying on until it was gone. Except this time, it was the opposite. This time he looked like a man who had been stripped of something for so long he had forgotten he was missing it and had just found it again. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Nurse." She waited. "I came to Harlan because I was running out of places to go," he said. "Oh, that's the truth of it. I wasn't looking for a barn to repair. I was looking for a place to stop long enough to remember why stopping was worth anything." He looked at her. "I found more than I was looking for." Vera looked at him. "I know what I am right now," he said. "My name is still in a Pittsburgh newspaper. I have no property, no standing, no references that haven't expired. A toolbox and what's left of whatever I knew how to do before the road." He paused. "Not much to offer." "No," Vera said, "it isn't." He absorbed that. "Honest," she said. "And in my experience, honest is rarer than property and harder to replace than standing." He looked at her. "I'm not asking for the property," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything that isn't offered. I'm asking if there's a place here that I'm allowed to work toward." "Take. Work toward." Vera looked at him for a long time. About the first day, the gate, the way he had latched it behind him, their sill plate, the drive to Gunderson's, Pennsylvania. The look on his face in Pruitt's office when she had stood between him and the incomplete story someone had tried to make his whole life, about what it meant to work towards something instead of just taking it. There were Connors. She had spent 2 years working toward the thing her father had left her, and she knew exactly what that cost, and she knew exactly what it was worth. "Yes," she said, "there is." He crossed the yard. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see everything his face was doing, which was more than she had ever seen it do before. More than he had let it do in all the weeks he'd been here. She didn't step back. "I don't know how to do this slowly," he said. "I spent 3 years keeping everything at a distance, and now I'm standing here with nothing at a distance at all, and I don't know the right words for it." "Then don't use words," she said. She was not a woman who said things at half volume. She had established that a long time ago. He put his hand against her face. He was rough from the work, warm from the afternoon, careful in the way all his most important things were careful. She put her hand over his and held it there. They stood like that in the middle of the yard.
Yeah.
Between the house and the barn, between everything that had been and everything that hadn't happened yet. Then she lowered his hand and held it, just held it, and turned back toward the house. "Come inside," she said. "I have letters to write, and I could use someone who knows how to put things in plain language." He almost smiled. "The whole thing this time." She saw it. "Plain language," he said. "You're good at it," she said. "Don't pretend otherwise." They went inside. Letters took 2 hours. Vera wrote, sat across the table and read each draft, and said occasionally, or, "That sentence has 3 meanings, to 1. The letters got better. She sent them with the Evening Post. There she made supper, and they ate at the table the way they always had, without ceremony, filling the quiet unnecessarily. Except it was different now. A different quiet, a different understanding of what the quiet meant. She poured coffee. He said, "What happens when the rail construction starts?" "Disruption," she said. 18 months. They'll need access through the east pasture. There will be machinery and men and noise. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Can 50 TST and $2,350, which I intend to put into the cattle operation. New breeding stock, better winter sheltering, maybe a second hand." Noah looked at his coffee cup. "Maybe," she said, "someone who already knows the property." He looked up. "That's a direction you want to go," she said, "as a permanent hand." "For wage." "A permanent hand," he said. "Art," she said. He held her gaze. He understood exactly what she meant by "to start." "Yes," he said. She nodded. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, the wind moved through the new timber of the barn roof. Clean and tight and solid, the sound of wood that would not shift or leak or fail for a generation. 3 weeks later, Hargrove wrote to say that the territorial attorney had opened a formal inquiry into the Voss Land Company's practices in Harlan County. Dillon had been the first to cooperate. He had given a full account of the scheme, from Voss as the architect and Burrell as the county official who had been compensated for his assistance. All had been suspended pending investigation. Aldrich had submitted a voluntary affidavit confirming the sequence of events at the land office and his role in the assessment revision. Voss had retained lawyers in Billings and had not been seen in Harlan County since the day he walked out of the land office. Vera read the letter at the kitchen table with Noah across from her and read the relevant parts aloud. Finished, she set it down. "It's over," she said. Noah said nothing for a moment. "The legal part," he said. Yes, she said. "The legal part." He looked at her. "Arrest," he said, "is just beginning." She looked at him. About her father, who had sat at this table for 30 years and built something out of nothing and left it to her because he knew she was the one who would keep it. About the man who had left because she was a complication. About 2 years of carrying everything alone. Not because she wanted to, but because there had been no one worth sharing it with. About a man walking up her drive with a toolbox and $3 standing between her and the end of everything. The and saying, "I'll start now. If you have the materials." "Yes," she said, "it is." The first snow came 2 weeks after that, overnight, quietly. The way the first snow always came in Montana, not like a storm, but like a decision. You went to sleep in one season and woke in another. Miller came out in the early morning and stood in the yard and looked at the barn, exactly as it should. Straight and solid, the roof line clean against the white, the north wall square and true. Foundation solid along the base. Noah's work showing in every course of stone, the careful fit of each joint. She heard the stable door. Noah came out and stood beside her. They looked at the barn together. "Hold," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. She thought about everything it had taken. The lumber and the nails and the receipts and the lawyers and the land office and the newspaper and the injunction that hadn't held. All of that. But also the smaller things. The gate touched. Coffee carried up a ladder. A sill plate disclosed before it became a secret. Drive to the mill in which 2 people stopped, pretending they had no history worth telling. About a man who had spent 3 years learning to leave, sledding here in the snow and not moving. "You stayed," she said. He looked at her. "You offered me something I was afraid of," he said. "People stay for wages and obligation. But a place," he stopped, looked at the barn again. "A place is different. You can't walk away from a place the same way. Because the place has part of you in it. The work you put into it, the decisions you made to protect it." He paused. "A part of me in this barn, in this property." Larger. He looked at her directly. "I'm not walking away from that." Vera looked at him. In her chest, something that had been braced against impact for 2 years simply let go. Like his hand, he held it. The snow was still falling. Lightly, the way good things sometimes come without announcement, without drama, as if they had simply been waiting for the right moment to arrive. Of her father's saying, the one he'd used every spring when the ground thawed and the work began again. Land doesn't ask who you were. It asks what you're willing to do today. Noah Carter had spent 3 years answering that question in one empty county after another, with no one watching and no one to tell him. The answer was good enough. He had answered it here, on her land, with his hands and his knowledge and his refusal to let a damaged barn be less than what it could be. He had answered it in a land office and a newspaper office and at a gate on a Monday morning when he could have kept walking. At corners, he had answered it the only way the answer meant anything, by staying. And Vera Sutton, who had been keeping this land and keeping her word and keeping herself together for 2 years without a single person beside her, who was worth the standing room, at the barn her father had built and Noah had repaired and she had defended, understood for the first time what her father had actually left her. The land, not the barn, not the water rights or the improved pasture or the $2,350 waiting in Hargrove's account. Knowing that what you build with honest hands, honest company, with honest purpose, is the only thing that holds when everything else is tested. That was the inheritance. And standing here in the first snow of the season, Carter's hand in hers and the barn, solid against the white, she knew she had earned every last piece of it. Some things are worth more than the price anyone tries to put on them. A woman who knows that is a woman no one can buy out. A man who finally understands he is one of those things, not the wage, the labor, not the skills in the toolbox, but the man himself. That man has found something no road and no betrayal, and no Pittsburgh newspaper can ever take back. About he had fixed her barn. She had given him back his worth. Neither of them would ever again mistake one for the other.